Let Sally get off the stage. As Sally has introduced, Nick Zaccardi, the agronomist at Nutrien in Gympie. Live locally here, spend a lot of time out on farm as my day-to-day job. Help a lot with all manner of farming enterprises, be it an avocado farm or a macadamia farm, beef cattle operations, dairy farms, cropping, hay, you name it, I help out. With that, so my contact details are up there if anyone would like to take a note of that, but yeah, I'm pretty easy to find for the most part. Now, today we're going to be focusing on how we can control and manage giant rat's tail. But just before we begin, I just wanted to highlight something Wayne said. I do spend a lot of time out on the farm, and often I do hear from a lot of people how it's always on their mind, controlling giant rat's tail, getting rid of it. I have a plant here, I have to stop. We get out of the buggy, they cut the heads off, they pull the plant out. A lot of effort goes into it, whereas if we manage it and maintain it and we still remain viable and economically viable, I think that's ultimately the best outcome we can achieve. So I just, appreciate what Wayne said about that because it's very true. I see it all the time. Rightio. So without further ado, just thought I'd highlight weeds are a big issue in Queensland agriculture. This is the most current data I could find, but almost $500 million is spent on managing weeds. That doesn't stem from the cost of controls. Obviously, the cost of controls is included in that, but that's loss of productivity as well from whether you're a broadacre cropper, you're running beef cattle, you're a dairy farm, whatever it may be. So that's reduction in weight gains, reduced fertility, and obviously the cost of controls. So a lot of money to be spent, but a lot of money to be saved as well if we implement some really good strategies and increase our productivity. So how do we reduce this? Well, there's no, as I'm sure you're all aware, and you'll probably continue to hear today, there is no silver bullets for any weeds, and these strategies can definitely be incorporated for any weeds that you may have on your farm, but we need to take an integrated approach to these weed controls. So this is a holistic approach where we encompass the whole farm. So we consider various methods of controls, which will be cultural controls. Now, Wayne did a really good job of explaining this, so a lot of the methods he mentioned would fall under that cultural controls. We will go into more detail throughout the talk, but basically a cultural control is something where we don't need to use a drum of chemical or something like that, so it would be biosecurity. Changing our agronomic practices to increase the competitiveness of our pastures and those kind of things. We've got biological controls now. My experience with these biological controls with giant rat's tail hasn't been very extensive, so we'll have some talks about that later, so they'll shed some more light onto that, which will be very, very good. But also, obviously, we've got our chemical controls, so they're, our glyphosate and flupropanate. But ultimately, these integrated approaches aim to reduce our reliance on these chemicals. And in order to do them, what we're doing is we're using all our tools in our toolkit. Okay, so whether it be grazing management, in competitive pastures, you name it. So let's dive into it. So we have heard of this. Yep, we got glyphosate. So interestingly, glyphosate bioactive is the only glyphosate that's actually registered for GRT. But it's non-selective, it's going to take out everything. As Wayne mentioned, there is a one-day grazing withhold. That's not actually from a livestock safety perspective, that's to just ensure there's enough chemical has been translocated from the leaf to the roots. I would actually encourage you to leave your stock out of a paddock a lot longer than that if you're boom spraying or blanket spraying a paddock. If you're spot spraying, there's not really much of an issue. But essentially how glyphosate works, it's absorbed via the grow points and the leaves, translocated from those leaves down via the xylem, which is essentially the plant's respiratory system or circulatory system, enters the roots, does some pretty cool biochemistry and stops them being able to synthesize amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Right, yeah, cool. Glyphosate's been around for a long time. It's probably going to be around for a lot longer as well. So yeah, but we will talk about that shortly as well. So the next one is flupropanate. Now, very quickly, very, very slow acting. Like if you read the label, it says 3 to 16 months to actually kill a plant. That's pretty slow. And as Wayne said, they will continue setting seeds during that period, which is pretty ordinary. It is selective at the correct rates. Now, I've heard of some pretty terrible stories, actually, where some fellas have misread the label and they've gone out with a very high rate and moonscaped their whole farm, whole paddocks. So that's not good. It sticks around in the soil for a long time, particularly the more clay you get in your soil, the longer it will stick around. So that's going to reduce productivity a lot if you're putting out incorrect rates. Yep, offers residual control, we know that. Multiple withholding periods, yep, we've spoken about that, so we won't talk much about that. And yes, works via the soil, so it's actually taken up via the roots and then kills the plants via that mode of action. That residual effect is dependent on our weather as well. So if we get a big lick of rain just after we apply it, probably not going to do a great job. If in dry conditions, it will hang around a lot longer, but also as well how much clay we've got in our soil, so how effectively that chemical then can bind to our soil will increase how long it hangs around and does its job for. Great. So we've spoken about this, so we won't spend much time on it. Now, one thing I did want to highlight is herbicide resistance. Now, it is a massive problem. We're pretty fortunate here that it's not as big as a problem as, say, as our farmers down south managing annual ryegrass. There are various other weeds as well that are developing resistance to various modes of action. Essentially, it's a big deal, and some estimations, again, this is pretty current data, say that herbicide, insecticide and fungicide, so your three main pesticides, resistance results in about $1 billion worth of loss each year in Australian agriculture. That's across Australia. So, nothing to sneeze at. That's essentially ineffective control of the target species. So if we're not using the chemistry correctly and we're going out at half rates, or we're not putting it out properly, or whatever it may be, we're using dirty water, there's a range of reasons why a pesticide won't work, and we're getting ineffective kills, and there's plants or insects or whatever it may be that are surviving, and they're able to then complete their life cycle, and they develop some pretty cool, actually, in all fairness, resistances to these herbicides or pesticides through genetic mutations, and then those genetic mutations are then passed on to the next generation, and the weaker generations are killed because a sublethal dose was obviously enough to target them, so they're all wiped out, and the ones that survive are the ones that have these genetic mutations, and they go on to breed and reproduce, and then the subsequent generations have resistance. So it's an even bigger problem. Now, I did mention it's a more of an issue down south than out in Western Queensland where they grow a lot of broadacre crops. I have seen multiple examples here. One example is some feathertop rhodes I found out on a property. The grower sprayed that with almost 4 litres per hectare of Crucial. Now, Crucial is what is Crucial? Crucial 600 grams per litre of glyphosate, so pretty potent stuff. He called me up and was like, hey, everything in this paddock is well and truly dead, but there's just this patch of grass that hadn't died. And I'm like, oh, okay, did you miss it or whatever it might have been? He said, no, he insured me. He got it. He had the GPS in his tractor, so it was unlikely that he missed it. So went out there, had a look, investigated it. It was, feathertop rhodes. We had to go in with a Group 1 herbicide to try and knock it. That one didn't work very well at all, which I suspected would be the case because it was a bit too mature, and plus it was a bit sick because it did take up some of the glyphosate. Anyway, we then had to double knock it, so we went in with a big rate of glufosinate, which is another herbicide, which is very similar to glyphosate in it's a non-selective, just has a different mode of action to glyphosate. We eventually got on top of it and killed it, but yeah, he had to spray it 3 times to kill it, and spent a lot more money doing it than he should have, and that's herbicide resistance. And more often than not, it's something we need to be very, very mindful. And like I said, more often than not, if something hasn't worked, we need to go back in with a different mode of action to control that. Otherwise, we're just going to be breeding resistance. So that's my little spiel on herbicide resistance. It is a massive problem, massive problem. Rightio. So let's talk about cultural controls for controlling some our weeds and giant rat tails in particular. So as I said, we're using all our toolkits, all our tools in our toolkit to get on top of it and reducing our reliance on chemistry. Chemicals are expensive. You won't hear me say they're not. I sell them every day. They are expensive day out. Not only that, they cost a lot of money in labour to put them out. So if we can reduce our reliance, we're going to obviously have a more sustainable long-term control of our weeds, and not necessarily environmental sustainability. I mean more so like is sustainability as like a long-term control. So the biggest thing we can do for our grass weeds and giant rat tail is encourage the competitiveness of our pastures and carrying capacity to our stocking rates. We will go into much more detail about that towards the end of the talk. Anyway, the next thing we will be doing is we're making use of various strategies and tools to clean up our paddocks, whether that be boom spraying, wick wiping, cultivating, mulching, slashing, fire, you name it. We've got lots of tools in our toolkit. Wherever possible, preventing seed set. Very, very difficult with giant rat tail. I will not try and convince you otherwise. However, if we can prevent the seed bank from increasing, we are doing a very, very good job. And the last one, farm biosecurity. Now, Wayne touched on this a lot, about how the giant rat tail seed can survive for a very, very long time. So I won't speak more to that, but it is very, very important. Very, very important. Rightio. So, if our pastures, like Wayne said, are looking like this, albeit it is a very severe example, but if we have pastures that are looking like this coming into our growing season, we're about to get, essentially our green date, where we get lots of rain and the soil temperatures warmed up to encourage our subtropical grasses to come away, the rat's tail is going to have a great time. There's no competition for it to stop it growing up. It's going to go absolutely prolific, and it's going to be a massive, massive problem. So through winter and through droughts, it is very, very important to manage our pastures so they're in good nick for when spring comes around and we get the rain and we get the warmth and our subtropical grasses want to grow. How do we avoid this? Is essentially, grazing management is our number one thing. We can also, I know this is a severe example, but with our normal pastures, which are looking not like that, and they've got a decent ground cover coming into spring, we can plant new varieties of these improved species which have better agronomic traits. So they're more water use efficient. They come away quicker. They may wake up out of dormancy at lower temperatures as well. So anything like that can improve how our pastures respond to rain is going to be a win. We want to make sure we have enough plants per square metre so that the weeds don't have an opportunity to grow. Though a lot of weed seeds will require sunlight to germinate. Not all of them, but there is a number of them that will. So if we are able to shade out the soil and they don't get any sunlight, they're not going to germinate. As well as good thick mulch cover as well is going to help. Addressing limiting nutrients. Now we'll go into a lot more detail about pasture agronomy shortly, but our pasture yields and growth is dictated by the nutrients in the lowest available quantities. So if we've got a pasture that's deficient, or we've got soil, that are deficient in sulphur, No matter how much nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium we put on, if we don't address sulphur, the pastures are never going to grow at their peak. And if we are cropping, I'm not sure if anyone does crop, but if we are cropping, we're rotating our species, so we're not always growing, monocots, which are grasses. We are incorporating dicots, such as legumes, whatever it may be. So we can use various chemistries if weeds do become an issue, but also each different species is going to have a different draw on soil nutrients, so we're not going to be continuously drawing down the nutrient reserves of the same nutrients. So basically, if our pastures are productive and well managed and well cared for, the weeds aren't going to be nearly as much of an issue as a pasture that looks like that. Rightio. So now the next one, we're going to use lots of different tools to control them. So a boom spray may be a great initial tool if we've got a very, very weedy paddock to get on top of it. It's quick, it's cheap, relatively speaking, compared to other methods such as going out there and digging it up and chopping seed heads off. Way to get on top of it really, really quickly. But we do not want to take just that approach, a spray and forget type of mentality, because it will achieve pretty much nothing, unfortunately. So then we might go in and wick wipe it after that. So we get the Rhodes grass up, or we plant some Rhodes grass or whatever it may be, get the Rhodes grass up, bit of rat's tail comes up, we wick wipe that after grazing, or we come back through with a mulcher, mulch down the rat's tail. I know it's not going to be ideal, but not everyone has an affinity for chemicals, which I can definitely appreciate. So we're reducing some of that competition so that the improved pasture species are growing with as little competition as possible. We can also use our cattle as a tool, so we bunch them up in a really, really tight mob. This one's most effective against your woody weeds. So if you get them in a really tight mob, they'll trample those woody weeds. And if we can time it when the woody weeds are just about to flower, those weeds will think they've completed their life cycle. They've been trampled and destroyed, and they're not going to necessarily regrow again. But that one can be a bit of a challenge because, timing is very, very important. Also as well with our livestock, if we do bunch them in a really nice tight mob, it concentrates their fertility, so the manure that comes out the back end of them, that is got all the nutrition that they don't need from the pasture in it. So we get some good healthy dung beetles floating around, doing their things. They start burying the manure, and that's, cycling nutrients really effectively. Now, burning's another tool. Again, it's a pretty cheap one, and if you've got a really weedy paddock to begin with, it's probably very attractive. I'm not for burning at all, and I won't be, backwards in saying that. Burning is going to damage our soil health, and at the end of the day, we're trying to promote our soil health to have as competitive pastures as possible. So we're also going to lose a lot of nutrient during the burning process. Is chemical reaction that occurs within the plants, and those chemicals are converted to they're basically oxidised, and then they're lost to the environment. So whereas if we're mulching or slashing, that nutrition will eventually get cycled back into our soil. I know if we've got 1,000 hectares to do, no one's going to sit on the tractor and do that. So different contexts, different tools, and just using the ones that work best for you. Now, managing and preventing seed set. Now, it is a challenge, don't get me wrong, but essentially this one comes back to grazing management. So if we have really, really good rotations where in the growing season, we'll have, with good conditions, good rainfall, good heat, good humidity, good soil fertility, there's no reason why we can't graze a really healthy and productive Rhodes grass plant every 35 to 45 days. So if we're rotating our cattle in and out all the time, and we're using these non-chemical cultural controls after the cattle have been moved out of that paddock, we are going to be preventing seed set very effectively. I know rat's tail does decide to go ahead and produce seeds really, really, really quickly, but if if we're stopping 50% of them producing seeds, what was the seeds? How many seeds did it produce? 85,000 or something. If we're stopping 50% of them producing that, we're doing a really, really good, really good job. And again, it's a non-chemical control, so, well, it can be if we're mulching it or slashing it or whatever it might be, or we're going around and spot spraying it or wick wiping it after the cattle have grazed. And so, quickly, biosecurity, very, very important. Very, very important. The seeds stick around for a long, long time. I was quite shocked when what Wayne said about how we can never clean down equipment properly. That was very interesting. But some other research I came across is 20% of the seeds that consumed by cattle remain viable on the other end. Which is pretty staggering, to be honest. They're pretty robust plants. They're designed to survive. So holding cattle in our yards, clearing them out, having buffer zones around our property obviously is very, very important. Good fencing obviously is very important. Stopping those pest animals carrying it. I know they don't carry a huge amount of it, but yet they will carry some along. So yeah, and just managing however we can. Very, very, very important is biosecurity. Now, so let's say we start a weeds program to control our giant rat's tail, and we go for a season, we do a really, really good job and get on top of it, and things are looking pretty good, and then next season comes around, and we decide, I did a good job last year, we're not going to do anything this year. Within 12 to 24 months, I've seen it as well, where some paddocks that have been ploughed, ripped, ploughed, sprayed out, you name it, planted to improve pastures, have gone back to rat's tail with poor management, and that comes back to ongoing management. Now, we'll talk about some costs of putting in improved pastures shortly, but it's a lot of money to spend to just have 2 years of it, and then it goes back and you've got to start again. And as well, if we are seeing individual plants, it's a lot easier to control an individual plant rather than a paddock full of them. Well, not necessarily, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's pretty easy to go out there and boom spray the whole lot, but it's a lot less labour intensive to control individual plants. And as well, wick wiping is very, very effective. It's a great tool we've got up in our toolkit. I probably don't see it used as much as I think we should be doing it, particularly if we are doing a rotational grazing operation. We'll talk more about grazing management shortly, but particularly because obviously if we have really productive pastures, the cattle are going to preferentially graze the improved species, leaving the rat's tail, whatever weed it might be, rat's tail, alone, and then we can come out really quickly with a weed wiper and knock them out, reduces the competition from our other species, and as well has virtually no impact on our favourable species that we want to foster. And also as well, biosecurity comes into this one as well, because we don't want to do a whole big effort and then, have some cattle brought in from some dirty country and then just let them go straight into our paddocks, and then we start to think, where's all this giant rat's tail come from? So yeah, ongoing maintenance, I don't think it will be a never-ending battle, and I don't think we're ever going to eradicate it. It is just such a robust plant, but we can definitely do a lot to reduce the impact it has on our farms, while also as well doing things very, very, very economically. Rightio. So they're cultural controls. Now, we've got. So I'm going to focus a lot. So, as I've been introduced, I'm an agronomist. I like plants. I like getting plants growing. I like seeing productive paddocks and having happy customers, which have got really productive pastures, and they got fat cows and fat cattle and things like that. So I'm going to focus a lot on on improved pastures for weed control, because ultimately this is your number one bang for buck thing we can do, is to foster our pastures, look after them. We get really, really effective control of our weeds, and we also put a lot of kilos on our cattle, okay? So we're going to talk about this we're going to focus mainly on this. And then once we get these improved pastures in place, how we look after them. So the first step I take, so let's say someone comes to me and says, right, I want to plant some rose grass, or I want to plant Gatton panic, whatever it might be. I'll say, rightio, have you got a soil test? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And I'll say, okay, well, rightio, we don't actually know if that soil is capable of supporting those improved pastures. So if we have a very, very weedy paddock, 9 times out of 10, there's a reason they're very weedy, and it's because they cannot actually support these improved species. So the first thing we do is I'll go out to farm and take the soil test. I don't have to come out to farm. You can bring me some soil and I can send it off to the lab and we get it analysed. Like, I don't do the soil testing myself, I send it to a lab. I don't have time for that, plus I don't have the expertise to do that. What my expertise lies is interpreting the results. So this is an example of a farm in the Gympie region which was very unproductive. Sorry, I shouldn't say farm, it's a paddock, a reasonably sized paddock that was very unproductive and was overcome with weeds. So we did a soil test out there, sent it off, got the results back. These are the results. So, this paddock here, in its current conditions, is incapable of supporting an improved pasture. So what I look at is, first of all, we'll look at the pH, okay? So that's the very first thing I'll look at. Okay, so the pH here, what was it? 6.4. So that's great. As long as, so that's great. Then the next thing I will look at is nitrogen, okay? So nitrogen is the number one deficiency in Australian soils. We've got old soils, they don't hold on to a lot of nitrogen. Thankfully, nitrogen deficiency is really, really easy to rectify. So 9 times out of 10, nitrogen is always deficient. I reckon I've found one farm which hasn't had nitrogen deficiency on it, and that was a dairy farm with really good pastures which had really good diverse legumes in it as well. So anyway, always nitrogen is deficient. The next thing I will look at is phosphorus. Now phosphorus is the driver of energy production within a plant. Without adequate phosphorus, we're going to have stunted plants. We're going to have an underdeveloped root system which further stunts the plants. The plants aren't going to be able to produce energy. They're basically starving. With an underdeveloped root system as well, that's just going to continually foster poor performance. Now, the next thing I will look at is potassium. These are the macronutrients essentially. So potassium is very, very, very important. It regulates stomatal control and stomatal development of a plant. Essentially, what the stomatas are where they suck in carbon dioxide and let out moisture. Okay, so if we don't have good stomatal control, the plant's in a drought condition, which, like right now it's probably pretty warm outside, it's not wet by any stretch of the imagination. What would happen now is the plant would close its stomatas, stop sucking in carbon dioxide, and basically reserve and look after and retain some moisture. If we don't have adequate potassium, those stomatas don't actually close, and the plants are losing a lot more moisture when they shouldn't be, which we burn through our moisture reserves really, really quickly. We're very fortunate here. We get so much rain that typically moisture isn't limiting. However, it does get dry and does forget to rain sometimes, so potassium is very important. The next one is sulfur. Now, sulfur drives nitrogen metabolism. Without adequate sulfur, even though we may have adequate levels of nitrogen, we're not going to be able to effectively utilise all that nitrogen, and the plants are still going to be stunted and not perform very, very well at all. It's also important for the production of protein and amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. So it also fosters really high protein pastures. Also critically important for legumes, just like potassium. So if we want a good legume pasture as well, we need good levels of potassium and sulfur. Rightio. The next thing I look at is the CEC. That's somewhere towards the bottom. What do we got? CEC in this soil is 5.4. That's pretty low. Basically, what the CEC refers to is how well your soils can hold on to nutrition. And the higher the CEC, the more nutrition they can hold on to. We can't change that very effectively. That's just our soil types and what the soil's parent material was made of. But if we can improve organic matter and organic carbon levels, we will increase our CEC. But it's very, very difficult to improve our CEC. So basically, with a low CEC soil, we'll just look at fertilising we are using different strategies, so we'll go in with small amounts very often. There's no point in putting a big lick of nutrition out because the soil just doesn't have the capacity to hold on to it. Then as well, just on that CEC, your sandy soils have very low CEC, where your heavier soils typically will have a much higher CEC, so your black clay soils, your vertisols, they're not real common around here, have a very, very high CEC. But we do have clay soils in this region which have very low CEC just because they're made from a different type of clay. So, and then I'll look at the organic carbon levels and the organic matter levels because that will describe to me the innate fertility of the soil. So organic matter has huge amounts of nutrition in it. I'm always blown away with how much nutrition can be held by organic matter. But yeah, the more we can raise that organic matter, the more fertile our soils will ultimately be. So we've talked about that. Now let's look at what the level should be. So as long as our pH is above 5.5, I'm pretty happy with that. Below 5.5, we get aluminium toxicity. Aluminium's toxic to plant roots. It essentially burns them off. And the plants invest a lot more energy in growing roots when it should be growing biomass. Above 7.4, look, there's not really anything we can do with a high pH soil. We can drop it using different tools, but it's pretty challenging. But essentially above about 7.4, trace element availability drops pretty low. I like a sweet spot around 6. 6 is pretty nice. So if you had a pH of about 5.5, I would encourage you to lime it and try and get that up to 6. The problem with liming is agriculture is inherently acidifying. Every time we remove something from the soil, nutrient is removed and that's replaced with hydrogen. Hydrogen is very acidic in our soils. So pH is a measure of hydrogen. So yeah, our soils will naturally acidify over time, so it's an ongoing thing. We've got to just keep monitoring and working it. Nitrate, nitrogen, we want that at 10 to 20 milligrams. That's about where we need to be for improved pastures. Ammonium, nitrogen, that's your more stable sources of nitrogen. So basically what happens is microbes will come and chew on that ammonium, convert it to nitrates, which then the plants prefer taking up nitrates. It's just a little bit easier for them to take up. The problem with nitrates though, they are not very stable in your soil. They're prone to leaching and denitrification and losses to the environment. Phosphorus, as long as we're above 15 milligrams, I'm pretty happy. Not really much to do there. With phosphorus, we also need to be mindful of the PBI. So our PBI is our phosphorus buffering index. That refers to how tightly our soils like holding onto phosphorus. Nothing we can do about that. We can't change that at all. It just means we generally, with a high PBI soil, we just got to put more phosphorus on. Sulfur, potassium, 2 centimoles per kilo of soil, sulfur 8 milligrams. So that's what we aim for. And it can be very, easy to get there with a good fertility program. I just thought I'd make a note. Now, if we just quickly go back, though that phosphorus level, what is it? It's 8 milligrams per kilo, so it's about half of where it should be. I found some data which was very, very, very compelling data. So it was about the same level of phosphorus deficiency in an Australian pasture. So this was data generated by a university. It was probably peer-reviewed, I can't remember if it was. But anyway, it's quite robust data nonetheless. And what they found was when your phosphorus levels were about half of where they should be, by rectifying them and bringing them up to where they should be, that 15 milligrams roughly, they produce 32% more biomass. So 32% more grass with a little bit of phosphorus. You know, it's pretty impressive, impressive return on investment there. And as well, the pasture is then more nutritious as well. Phosphorus is very, very, very important for your breeder cattle. It's also important for growing stock as well. So if you have more nutritious pasture, they'll put on more weight. And we get, 32% more grass. Like, I don't know many people that would say, no, I don't want 32% more grass in my paddock. Right-tio. So now we've got the soil test, we've got a fertility plan in place. Basically, that other soil test we did, what we did was we put a bit of sulphate of ammonia out. That rectified the nitrogen and the sulphur deficiency. We put a big lick of compost out as well because the farmer, wanted to do things a little bit more natural, which I'm all for. I'm all for compost and organics. I think they're underutilised. You just have to use them correctly. So we put out phosphorus via the compost. We put a bit of potassium out as well via the compost, but then we also put out some sulphate of potash as well. And I went back to look at their pastures probably 6 or 8 weeks later, and they were shocked at how well they responded. We'll go through some costings as well shortly. But yeah, it's very, very good. Very, very good response. Another reason we went with the compost as well, it's got very high organic matter levels, which is going to help retain nutrition in a low CEC soil. So yeah, we've got lots of strategies up our sleeve to get really productive pastures. So now we've got a soil test. We know what's limiting in our soils. We've got a plan to fix it. We need to then clean up the paddock. If we've got a really, really weedy paddock, chances are there's billions of seeds in the soil. Like you wouldn't be able to estimate how many there were. There'll just be lots. So if we wanted to go back to improved pasture, I'd definitely recommend you to go through a clean-up phase. That can be, there's a number of options here. This is one of them with crop rotation. So if we're targeting broadleaf weeds, for example, we'll go in with, say, monocot, like oats or whatever it may be, sorghum, where we can use selective in-crop sprays for dicots, so your broadleaf weeds. If we're targeting grasses, we can go in with a vetch or cowpea, whatever it might be, where we can go in with monocrot-specific herbicides, which are only going to kill grasses and leave your legumes alone. The beauty of these, like this, they cost a lot of money, but you can still put a lot of weight on cattle. Some really good data I got from a grower just this season where we were cleaning up a paddock. He's planning to put it back into improved pasture eventually, but he's wanting to crop it for a while. He wanted to fatten some steers. He wanted to turn off a lot of steers as well, and he was originally going to go in with oats. I said, why don't we just go in with a ryegrass pasture? He's got some water that he can throw on it, so I wouldn't recommend ryegrass to everyone, but we went in with some ryegrass. He was able to spray out the broadleaf weeds, which he was really happy about. We were being mindful of the grazing interval as well, but he's averaging 2.1 kilos of weight gains per day on young cattle, which is still growing bone, which is pretty impressive. He is throwing a bit of nitrogen on it as well, but not as much as you would think. He's about 120 kilos a month, so, not a lot of nitrogen. We're cleaning up a paddock, and we're putting a lot of weight on cattle as well. And as well, they're averaging that over the period. For about the first month they were introduced, he reckons they were going backwards. He did weigh them. He was putting on about 0.3 kilos a day, so now they're absolutely humming along He's worried they're going to get too fat and the feed loss is not going to take them. So anyway, it's a good problem to have, I guess. The third option as well is, so plant breeders have done a pretty cool job and bred in herbicide resistance or tolerances into various crops. So that's a crop of Sentinel sorghum. So basically we can spray an IMI group herbicide. They're really cool herbicides, really cool chemistry, which are going to target both grasses and broadleaf in crop and do no damage to your sorghum. The only thing with that one is they got a pretty long plant back period, so unless you plan on cropping it for a while, I would avoid that situation. However, really effective way to clean up a paddock. Really, really effective way. They are great chemistry. They do a fantastic job, but they do stick around for a while. And again, you know, that's not ideal for grazing. So I'm doing this strategy with some dairy farmers that have got some barnyard grass and crowsfoot in their paddocks. We're going in with an IT corn this season, or IT maize. And then, yeah, we're going to get... Oh, and Johnson grass. That's the main one, but they do have a bit of barnyard grass as well. So we're going in with that. It's a cropping paddock that will remain cropping forever, so it's fine. So we can plant IT wheat into it in winter. But yeah, really, really effective tool to clean up a paddock as well. Now, the next option is if we can afford to fallow a paddock, we can get really great control on weeds. Really, essentially in a fallowed paddock, we're just going to be encouraging the weeds to grow. And then we're going to come in and control them, whether it's by a spray or a cultivation or whatever it is. We kill them before they have a chance to set any seed. So if we can reduce the seeds to virtually none, that's your number one tool you got in your toolkit. Fallowing paddocks, look, I'm not for it, I'm not against it. They have a place. We will burn through all our organic matter really quickly in a fallowed paddock. However, if we can reduce our weed burden, be giant rastel, whatever it might be, and we can plant improved pastures back into that in 12, 18 months, whatever it is, we will start sequestering huge amounts of carbon really, really quickly, and we will replenish that really quickly. We're very fortunate here with the amount of rainfall we get. So yeah, that's fallowing. It's another tool in your toolkit. Obviously, not everyone likes using chemicals. I can appreciate that. I don't like using chemicals at home either. I'll actively avoid it if possible. But yes, this is another tool, but not necessarily a fan of it, but I can definitely appreciate why some people would go this way. Now, so let's say 18 months down the track, we've cleaned up our paddock and we're happy with how much weed seed we've got rid of. There's not much germinating anymore. We're very happy about that. So next we will establish the improved pasture. So we've got our soil tests. We know what's limiting pasture growth. We've got rid of the seeds. We're ready to sow the pasture. Now, the first thing you need to do is select an appropriate species. There's no point in selecting cocksfoot or fescue because it's just not going to grow here. We've got to select something which is a subtropical grass. So select the right species. I would always encourage you to put legumes in it as well. We'll talk about diversity in 1 second as well, but won't get too ahead of ourselves. We'll do one final weed control pre-sowing. Again, further reducing the weed seed bank, just removing any competition. We will, when we've gone through that cleanup phase and we haven't cultivated necessarily, I will always encourage the growers to cultivate that paddock and create a really nice seed bed. Otherwise, the pasture species are going to really struggle to establish, whereas if they've got a nice clean seed bed that's ready to go, the seedling vigour is very much increased, and if we can get better seedling vigour, we get more carbohydrates being produced by the plant, we get more carbohydrates being punched down into the roots, so we grow bigger roots, and we get more root exudates being punched into the soil to feed the biology. So ultimately, if we can get the plants humming along and growing as well as they possibly can, we will have more productive pastures long term. So we've got the seed bed sorted, then we will go in with, we will wait for conditions to be right. So there's no point in sowing a summer active grasses in the middle of winter. You know, let's say we get conditions for them to germinate, but then we get a frost to come through. It's essentially like bringing a blowtorch to them. They're not going to like it, and you're going to have to re-sow again anyway. I always encourage growers to sow into moisture rather than sowing dry and waiting for moisture. If we get a little bit of rain, which is just enough to encourage germination, but get no follow-up rain, we're going to pretty much have a failed crop, and we're going to have to start again with sowing, not the whole process. Whereas if we have good moisture and good conditions prior to sowing, and we got a little bit of rain coming up, what will happen is the seedlings will punch their taproot down really effectively into that moisture, and they'll be a lot more robust. It's not bulletproof, obviously, so there will be other things to consider. Radio, got to keep going. We want to make sure machinery is well calibrated, so we're not wasting seed or putting too little out, because that will, if we're not putting enough plants per square metre out, we're going to give opportunity for weed seeds to germinate. We want to plant with fertiliser. Even if phosphorus levels are very good in your soil, I would still encourage you to plant with phosphorus, because that will encourage better root development early on. Then we'll come through and do post-emergent checks, make sure things are germinating, make sure things are happy, make sure there's no pest or disease coming in. It can happen. And yeah, if there is anything, we come and rectify it quickly. Then we have really good grazing management. Now, we'll talk about that in 1 minute. I think it's after this slide. This is about diversity. So there's a couple, this is a really, really interesting data that we found. So diverse pastures always seem to perform better than monocultures. So there's two theories for it. There's the sampling effect, which is, well, we'll just throw everything in the kitchen sink at it and something will thrive. I don't necessarily agree with that. What the other theory is, it's more of a community effect, whereas we've got different species with different nutritional needs. We've got different species with different rooting depths. We've got some species which have big fibrous root systems that can explore the soil really effectively. We've got other species with tap roots, so they're going deeper in the soil. So everything is basically working in synergy with one another and complementing one another. So that's this theory I tend to agree with the importance of diversity. So yeah, diverse pastures always will outcompete a monoculture pasture, particularly if you've got lots of legumes in it. They'll be putting in nitrogen. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute. So once we've got that improved pasture established, we need to look after it. So if we're not looking after it, it will eventually go back to weeds. No matter how good it is and how good you think you got it, it will eventually go back to weeds if we're not managing it properly. So we need to manage our nutrients really, really effectively. So we need to replace what we're taking away. So I don't know what all you guys here do, but this is typical nutrient removal rates for the most common livestock businesses here. So for every tonne of beef we produce, we're removing, 27 kilos of nitrogen, 7.5 kilos of phosphorus and a little bit of potassium. If we are not replacing what we remove, we will mine our soil down and we will remove all that nutrition and we will no longer be able to support that improved pasture. So that comes back to nutrient management, and I'm not fussed whether it comes from a bag that's produced in China, chemical fertiliser, or like Wayne said, it comes out of a chicken's rear end. Plants don't see nutrients any differently, and they will take them up all the same. They all have a place, but if we are not managing our nutrition really effectively, we will mine our soil down and we will run our soil on carbon, and we will never accumulate much carbon, so we're not going to have robust and resilient pastures when dry conditions do come back, and ultimately we are going to get back to weeds because those soils will never be able to effectively support those improved pastures. Just making sure we're managing nitrogen. Nitrogen is the most common deficiency we see across the board. Stunted plants, nitrogen is the main component of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is used to photosynthesize. Plants use photosynthesis to produce energy. If they don't have energy, they don't grow. They don't grow roots, they don't grow, they're no good. Phosphorus, we don't remove a huge amount of phosphorus, so we don't have to be replacing phosphorus all that often, which is something we need to monitor and maintain. That is the difference between phosphorus deficiency and phosphorus at good levels of phosphorus. Pretty stark, pretty stark. That could be, you know, compost, DAP, MAP, rock phosphate, whatever, super. As long as we are managing phosphorus, that will be your biggest limiter to growth. Righto, we got to power along. Potassium and sulfur. So these are really mainly for legumes as well. We're going to get the most response from this. So just quickly on legumes will fix atmospheric nitrogen. They're pretty cool. What they can do, what we can do, so the Haber-Bosch process is how we make urea essentially. We need to heat the atmosphere, we need to heat gas up to something like, where are we? Over 200 degrees, and what is it? It's how many atmospheres of pressure? 150 atmospheres of pressure. So we need to heat the atmosphere, so the gas, to 200 degrees, and we need to do that at 150 atmospheres of pressure. And a legume can do that at room temperature and 1 atmosphere of pressure. That's pretty amazing. Like, let's be honest. It's pretty amazing. To make urea, it is very energy intensive, and that's why it's over $1,000 a tonne or whatever it is at the moment, because it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of diesel to do it. So as diesel prices go up, so do urea prices. So there's a bit of an insight for you. If diesel prices start going up, yeah, you might want to buy some urea. Not necessarily. Might want to buy some compost or something. Anyway, so, but because that does take a lot of energy for the legume to do that, the legumes don't actually share nitrogen between other plants. That's like you housing someone, feeding them, watering them, looking after them, giving them a place to live, and then them going to work for the neighbour. You wouldn't do that for very long. I don't know, I wouldn't anyway. Legumes will do the same thing. They're not going to share the nitrogen. The only time the nitrogen is then shared is when a cow comes through, or a sheep, or whatever it is, comes through, chews off the top. The plant no longer has the energy to support those nodules, which are what the nitrogen is in, those nodules are where the bacteria are housed. So then what will happen is they no longer can support them, they die, they fall off the roots, and then other microbes come along and chew on them, and as they chew on them, they mineralise the nutrition that's in those rhizomes, and then that is released to the soil. So the nitrogen that legumes fix will inevitably be released into the soil, but it's not, the legumes aren't, you know, punching out lots of nitrogen into the soil. And if we don't have enough potassium, phosphorus or sulfur, and a couple other very trace elements, they won't actually fix nitrogen at all. The next thing we need to be very mindful is soil structure. If we have high soil strength, it's going to, we're not going to be able to effectively infiltrate water, and we're going to get, you know, conditions like that. And then with high soil strength, plant roots can't grow, they can't grow deep into the soil, we lose resiliency, they no longer can take up as much nutrition as they need to. So what we need to do is we need to manage sodium levels. It's not too common here, thankfully, but essentially we want less than, we want our soil particles to look like, you know, diversity of calcium, magnesium, potassium and sodium. If we get too much sodium in our soil, we get sodic soils, we get high soil strength. And that can come from number of reasons. Primarily it's due to our soil characteristics, but if we're using salty water or we're putting on, we're not managing our soils effectively, we will get there. Alrighty, got 5 minutes. Let's quickly power through effective use of livestock. Okay. Grazing management, really, really, really important. So basically what happens here, we have, just imagine this is a big, beautiful rose grass plant. Our fat cow comes along, chomps off the top of it, that's what's left. then what happens is the Rhodes grass plant will then draw on its energy reserves in its roots that it's got stored up to regrow its leaf. So because we've removed its leaf, it's no longer able to undercarry photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the way that the plants replenish their stored energy along with good nutrition in our soil. So let's say we get to that stage and then, the cow comes back and chews on it again. The plant goes, rightio, not the end of the world. However, I now need to pull on even more energy that I've got stored in my roots. That's okay, I can do that. But we're not going to be able to support all those big roots again. So we're going to have a plant that regrows a lot slower. It can no longer tolerate as dry conditions. It can no longer find nutrition nearly as easily as it can when it has twice as big as the root system, and it's going to be a lot slower. Then let's say we get to that stage again and the cow comes back and says, oh beauty, look, really nice sweet pasture we've got here. Let's chew on it again. The plant then says, nah, I give up. I've got no more energy left in my roots. I can't grow back from this. I haven't had a chance to replenish energy. And then it moves out of the system because it eventually dies. It may not take 3 grazings. It might take a bit more. However, inevitably, if we set stock our cattle are like kids. I'm sure lots of you have kids. They're not going to eat their broccoli first. They're going to eat, their ice cream first if you give them the opportunity. At least mine will. The cattle are the same. They're going to eat the sweetest, most nutritious stuff first and leave everything else. And then what happens is when we lose our Rhodes grass, which is really, really productive, or panic, or whatever it is, they're going to go do that to the next most palatable thing, which is like Soteria or whatever it is, whatever we've got in our paddocks. And then eventually they're going to chew on everything that is palatable, and all that's going to be left is weeds. So we really, really need to graze our cattle effectively and allow our pastures to recover. And like I said, we can typically do that in about 35 to 45 days in the middle of the growing season if we have good moisture, good heat, good fertility. So we cannot set stock our animals. I'm not sure, I don't, it's probably a bit strong language, but I don't care what anyone tells you, we cannot set stock our paddocks. The grass's physiology does not support being constantly grazed by a set-stocked animal. We need to rotate our cattle. There are pasture species that are more tolerant of set stocking, definitely. However, they will still inevitably be grazed out. So essentially we're using rest and recovery as a tool to allow our pasture species to replenish all the energy that they've lost by being grazed and regrowing that leaf. I know I'm flying through this. I'll be here for the rest of the day. I'm just running a bit short on time. Tools, electric fences, there's collars coming out which allow for virtual fencings and things like that. The one thing I will say is with a rotational grazing operation, water infrastructure is the most important part of it. So before you decide to go out and decide to change from set stocking to rotational grazing, please think about your watering source, otherwise it will make your life a nightmare. Now, managing pastures in drought, probably not what everyone wants to hear, but let's say we've done all this really, really good stuff. We've removed all the weed seeds, we've done everything really, really well. We've got beautiful, productive pastures. We're managing our grazing really effectively. We're not overgrazing. We're doing everything right, and then a drought comes, and we're like, right, what do we do? My best advice is to make decisions early. That is when cattle prices are still generally quite good, hay prices haven't jumped, or you can find agistment easier. If we leave it to the last minute and we are overgrazing, and we haven't had that spring rain and the pastures aren't responding, and we get to a point where it's bare country, we know what the first thing is going to come up. It's going to be the weeds. And all that work we've just done, we'll have to start again. So droughts are no good. We're very fortunate here. We do have very, very reliable rainfall. However, it wasn't too long ago. We got pretty dry 2019. It was pretty dry 2023 for most of winter. Autumn and winter was pretty dry as well. We just need to manage our pastures effectively. And the best advice, it comes back to context. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but the advice I will give to you is to make a decision very, very early. Okay. Because cattle will be in good nick, cattle will be in good condition still, they're worth a bit more money, hay is a bit... All right, anyway, you get the picture. I don't need to tell you how to run your operation. All right, so this is an example of some fellas that are doing a really good job. It's not perfect, but it's great. It's really good what they're doing. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with the farm. This is out the back of Kendanga there. They were happy for me to share this for you. These pastures are 5 years old. I think I took this footage in about, would have been March. So they've planted pasture, an improved pasture, gone through this whole long process, spent a lot of time and money doing it, done a really good job. Where are we at? So they've done it on a very big scale as well, which is really cool. So as I said, this is 5 years this pasture was sown. So, and the most impressive thing is this farm was wall-to-wall rat's tail. Nothing else. Wall-to-wall rat's tail. So they take the time and money and effort to plough it out, cultivate it, reduce the weed seed bank, plant improved species, rectify the limiting nutrients, look after their paddocks, have really good grazing management, really good. I can't fault them on their grazing management there. Look, I'm not going to say there's no rat's tail in there. You can probably pick out a bit of it, but it is completely different to what it was. Now, in terms of costs, so soil tests, about $250. To spray out a paddock with glyphosate twice, so you're looking at 5 litres a hectare each spray, let's say. That's a very high rate, we wouldn't necessarily use that. But yeah, let's just say that's $100 a hectare, right? We go in with an improved pasture species. Now these fellas use a very expensive seed mix. It's based on Mekong. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's pretty robust grass. It's unreal. That costs them about $30 a kilo. They're sowing it at 12 kilos a hectare. So we've got $360 a hectare there. Fertiliser, that's a commodity. It's always changing, but let's just say it's about $900 a tonne, give or take. You know, urea's up about $1,000 odd a tonne now. They're going in with, what did they do? They went in with 200 kilos a hectare of a custom blend I did up for them to initially. Now we've done follow-up soil tests, we've rectified the deficiencies, so now we're just managing those deficiencies, managing the soil chemistry. So this season they'll just go in with 100 kilos of urea when there's a bit of rain about and the soil temperature's warm, which is, now. So that's a lot cheaper to go in with 100 kilos of hectare of urea, just straight urea, than it is this custom blend, which was just over $200 close to $200 a hectare, and then they told me they budget on about $600 a hectare for cultivating, spraying, planting. So $1,540 it cost them to put in this improved pasture. They did that 5 years ago. That's based on economics of today though, so that's been there for 5 years. Now, I was out there with them a couple of weeks ago. We were looking at some cattle. We were looking back at some data. So in the peak of the growing season, they had young cattle, so steers. They were, that 300 to 350 kilos. They were averaging 1.4 to 1.6 kilos a day on this pasture. So they're putting on a lot of weight. They're still growing bone, right? So then I said, what about your old cows that you want to fatten? And he says they're closer to just over 2 kilos a day, if you've got old cracker cows that you're wanting to fatten and turn off. Pretty impressive. It doesn't take a lot of kilos to pay for that, when you think about how long it will last and be if you look after it. Anyway, I know that was really quick. I probably bit off a bit more than I could chew, but anyway, we got there in the end. I haven't run too late. Like I said, I will be here all day. You can find me. My contact details, I can put them up if anyone wants to see them again. Happy to have fields phone calls or emails or come out on farm and do all that fun stuff. I spend, 4 or 5 days a week on farm. I get around a lot. I really do love what I do. I enjoy having success stories like this as well. So thank you for all your attention. And just come find me if you have any questions.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
If you've got one take-home message for all of these people, what would it be?
The more you put in, I know. The more you put in the more you put in, ultimately, the more you're going to get out. So if we're managing our nutrition of our pastures really well, we're going to have more productive pastures long term, and we're going to be, make more, put more beef on cattle, which is ultimately what we want to achieve.